You don't have to face this alone.
Thank you.
The dusty frontier town of Broken Horn was a place where dreams went to die. And on that sweltering August afternoon, the auction block was slick with human misery and the jeers of callous men who had forgotten how to feel anything resembling genuine compassion or decency. Silas Granger had ridden down from his high country cattle ranch with the sole intention of purchasing a sturdy milk cow to replace the old heifer that had finally gone dry after 12 faithful years of patient and uncomplaining service in his modest and weathered barn. He was a lonely man of 35, his hands calloused and his heart sealed shut since scarlet fever had stolen his sweet young wife, Eleanor, 3 winters past, leaving him with nothing but a silent cabin and a grief too heavy to share with any living soul in that vast and empty territory. The auctioneer, a greasy vulture named Cobb, had already sold off the bankrupt farmer's plow, his mules, and his last sack of seed grain, and the final lot was a young woman the town had cruelly and dismissively labeled simply as the Mute, with a sneer of utter and contemptuous finality. She stood on the rough wooden block with her head bowed so low that her dark, tangled hair formed a curtain around her face, and her thin shoulders trembled beneath a threadbare dress that had been patched 100 times by desperate and unskilled hands. The crowd laughed and made crude, vile jokes about a woman who could not even scream, and they called her damaged, worthless, a broken doll that no decent man would ever want in his kitchen or his bed, not for any price or any promise. Silas felt a cold, righteous fury building in his chest as he watched a fat, leering saloon keeper bid $2 pitiful for the girl, licking his greasy lips as if she were a slab of fresh venison hanging on a rusty hook in a dark and filthy smokehouse. Without a single conscious thought or any calculation of the consequences, Silas raised his massive hand and bid $3, his deep voice cutting through the jeers like a sharpened hunting knife, slicing through rotten canvas with a single clean and decisive stroke. The gavel fell with a sickening crack, and suddenly Silas Granger, a man who had only wanted a cow, was the reluctant and bewildered owner of a terrified, speechless young woman he had absolutely no earthly idea what to do with on his remote and isolated mountain homestead. He climbed onto the auction block, gently untied her raw and chafed wrists from the filthy rope that had bound her for hours, and he wrapped his own heavy wool coat around her shaking shoulders without uttering a single command or a single harsh word of any kind. She did not look up at him, and she made no sound at all, not even a whimper, as he lifted her onto the back of his gentle old gelding and led her away from the jeering crowd toward the high, pine-scented trails that led to his secluded and peaceful valley. Her name, he later learned from a crumpled paper in the pocket of her dress, was Elawan, a beautiful and musical name that sounded like the whisper of wind through aspen leaves or the murmur of a hidden spring bubbling up from the deep and ancient earth. For the first 3 weeks, Elawan did not speak a single syllable, and she communicated only through the terrified language of flinches and wide, haunted eyes that seemed to be perpetually watching for the next inevitable blow to land upon her fragile and unprotected flesh. Silas gave her the small, clean spare room that had once been meant for a child that never came, and he placed a vase of wild columbine on the windowsill, hoping that something beautiful and alive might help her feel even a fraction safer in this strange and lonely new world. He never raised his voice, never entered her room without knocking softly and waiting for her hesitant, almost imperceptible nod, and he always moved slowly and predictably around the cabin, so that she would learn that he was not a threat but a steady and unchanging protector. He spoke to her gently each evening as they sat by the crackling hearth, telling her about the cattle, the weather, and the old Bible stories his mother had read to him when he was a barefoot boy running through the bluebonnet fields of a long-lost Texas childhood. Though she made no sound in response, Silas noticed that her eyes began to follow him with a glimmer of something other than fear, a faint and fragile curiosity that that reminded him of a newborn fawn taking its first trembling steps into a sun-drenched and unfamiliar meadow. One morning, he discovered that she had quietly mended a torn shirt he had left on the chair. The stitch is neat and impossibly delicate, and he realized that her silence was not emptiness, but a deep and wordless language of its own profound and intricate design. He thanked her with a warm smile and a simple nod, and for the first time since the auction, the ghost of a smile flickered across her pale lips like the brief and brilliant flash of a hummingbird's wing catching the morning light through a dew-kissed window. Spring melted the mountain snows, and Alain began to follow Silas to the barn, where she discovered that the milk cow he had finally purchased was a gentle creature who responded to his silent, patient touch with soft bellows of contentment and trust. She started tending a small kitchen garden, her fingers remembering the feel of good soil and the promise of seeds. And soon neat rows of beans and pumpkins were pushing through the dark earth like tiny green miracles of resilience and stubborn, unkillable hope. Silas would watch her from the corral, his heart swelling with a tenderness so fierce it nearly choked him, and he realized that he no longer dreaded the silence of his cabin, but instead treasured the quiet, companionable peace she had brought into every corner of his once bleak and echoing existence. He wrote her little notes and left them on her pillow. Simple things like, "The sky is especially blue today," or "I am glad you are here." And he noticed that she kept every single one in a small wooden box beside her bed, tied with a faded ribbon she had found in an old trunk. One evening, as a violent summer thunderstorm rolled over the mountains with a fury that shook the very foundations of the cabin, a terrified cry from the barn sent Silas running through the lashing rain with his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild stallion beating against a splintering corral gate. A dead pine had crashed through the roof of the lean-to, and Alain was trapped beneath a tangle of branches, her eyes wide with a terror that reached back into the darkest, most unhealed chambers of her shattered and silent past. As Silas frantically hauled the timber away with his bare hands, blood streaming from his torn palms, he heard a sound that stopped him dead in his tracks and sent a shockwave of incredulous, breathtaking joy through every fiber of his being. From Alain's lips, raw and trembling and barely audible above the howling wind, came a single word, a name, the very first word she had spoken since witnessing the unspeakable slaughter of her entire family on the Oregon Trail 4 years before. The word was not help or please or any cry of desperation, but his own name, Silas, and it fell from her mouth like a pearl of infinite price, a sacred and irreplaceable treasure born from the deepest well of her newly awakened and fiercely courageous heart. He pulled her from the wreckage and held her against his chest, both of them soaked and shivering, and he wept without shame as she repeated his name over and over like a prayer, her voice rusty and halting but the most beautiful and miraculous sound he had ever heard in all his 35 lonely and searching years on this vast and often merciless earth. That night, wrapped in quilts by the roaring fire, she began to speak in halting, fragmented sentences, telling him about the massacre, the silence that had swallowed her like a deep and airless tomb, and the slow, patient way he had taught her that words could be safe again, and that a man's voice did not always precede a blow. Silas listened until the fire burned down to embers, and then he took her hands in his, looked into her tear-bright eyes, and told her that she was not damaged or worthless, but the most astonishingly brave and profoundly beautiful soul he had ever been blessed to encounter on this side of heaven's golden and merciful gates. In the weeks that followed, Alain's voice grew stronger, and she began to sing the old Welsh lullabies her mother had crooned to her in a stone cottage across the ocean, her clear, sweet melodies filling the cabin with a magic that made the very pines outside seem to lean closer and listen with rapt and silent attention. She told Silas that she loved the way he said her name, and he confessed that hearing her speak his name for the first time had been the moment he knew, with absolute and unwavering certainty, that he wanted to spend every remaining day of his life as her devoted and eternally grateful husband. They were married in a small log church at the foot of the valley, with wild roses braided into Eloan's shining hair, and the preacher who had heard the whole miraculous story declared that this union was proof that God still walked the frontier and still whispered hope into the most broken and unlikely of places. The rancher who had paid $3 for a mute girl now had a wife who could debate cattle prices, recite entire chapters of the Psalms from memory, and calm a spooked horse with nothing but the gentle, lilting rhythm of her once silent and now gloriously liberated voice. Their ranch prospered beyond anything Silas had ever dreamed, because Eloan had a brilliant mind for figures and a gift for gentling even the wildest mustangs with the same patient, intuitive wisdom that had once coaxed her own shattered soul back from the silent, shadowy abyss of utter and complete despair. She started a small school in their front parlor, and the children of far-flung homesteaders would ride for miles to learn their letters. From the woman who had once been unable to speak a single word, but who now possessed the most eloquent and compassionate tongue in the entire Powder River territory. Silas would often sit on the porch, listening to her teach, and he would remember the dusty auction block, the cruel laughter, and the 3 crumpled dollar bills that had felt like a fortune, but had actually purchased the most priceless and redemptive treasure the frontier had ever produced from its harsh and unforgiving soil. Their first child, a daughter they named Hope, was born on the anniversary of that stormy night when Eloan had first spoken, and Silas held the tiny infant in his trembling hands and whispered that her mother was living proof that hope could bloom from the most barren and desolate of human landscapes. Eloan told her daughter, as soon as she was old enough to understand, that silence had once been her prison, that love had become her key, and that the first word she ever spoke was not a cry of fear, but the name of the man who had shown her that she was infinitely and irrevocably worthy of being heard and cherished and adored. Years rolled on, and the Granger Ranch became a legendary stopping place for weary travelers. Each of whom received a hot meal, a soft bed, and the story of the mute girl who had found her voice in the arms of a lonely rancher with $3 and a heart full of unspoken, patient, and transformative grace. Eloan never forgot the feeling of being called damaged, and she made it her life's mission to seek out every broken and discarded soul within 100 miles, offering them the same gentle, unwavering kindness that had once resurrected her own ability to speak and to love and to hope again. Silas grew old with his beloved wife by his side, and on their 50th anniversary, he presented her with a small velvet box containing a golden locket engraved with the words, "First spoken, Silas," and she laughed and wept and kissed his weathered face with the same tender passion that had first broken her long and terrible silence so many years before. She asked him if he had ever regretted those $3, and he replied that it was the only purchase he had ever made that had increased in value with every single passing sunrise, until it had become the very cornerstone of his entire, eternal and joy-filled existence under the watchful and benevolent stars. Their story was written down in a leather-bound journal and passed from generation to generation, a testament to the truth that the most powerful words in any language are not the loudest or the most eloquent, but the ones spoken first, trembling and raw, from a heart that has finally found its home and its courage and its voice. Silas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89, and Eloan sat beside him, holding his hand and singing the old Welsh lullaby he had loved, her voice steady and strong even as tears streamed down her wrinkled and beautiful cheeks like rivers of gratitude and profound and undying love. She joined him in glory 3 years later, and the entire valley mourned the passing of the woman who had arrived in silence and departed as the most beloved and influential matriarch the frontier had ever known, leaving behind a legacy of healing, eloquence, and the stubborn, unshakable conviction that no one is ever truly damaged beyond the reach of a patient and unconditional love. So if you ever encounter a soul that the world has labeled mute, broken, or worthless, remember Elawin and Silas. And remember that the greatest words are often hidden in the deepest silences, waiting only for the gentle touch of a love that is brave enough to listen and tender enough to wait for that first miraculous and life-changing whisper of a name spoken in the sacred and transformative language of absolute trust. Subscribe to Western Tales Official right now so you never miss another breathtaking frontier story where the most overlooked and discarded souls become the most radiant and celebrated legends of the untamed and glorious American West, and where every silence holds the promise of a song that is waiting to be sung by the right and perfectly patient heart. Tell me in the comments below if you have ever witnessed the power of a first spoken word, and whether you believe that the deepest healing comes not from loud declarations, but from the quiet, persistent, and unwavering presence of someone who refuses to give up on you, no matter how long you have been silent or how damaged the world has cruelly and ignorantly declared you to be. Like this video with all the warmth of a cabin hearth on a stormy night if you believe that true love is the only language that can resurrect a silent soul, and share this tale with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice, no matter how long it has been buried, is the most precious and irreplaceable gift they will ever offer to the world, and to the one who is brave enough to listen and strong enough to wait for the miracle of that very first, trembling, and eternally beautiful word.